A lot of people.
Good.
Thank you for coming. My God.
Good? Okay.
Can you hear this? Yes. Wish I could see you all better.
Well, we'll bring up the lights later. Oh, is that better?
Goodness gracious. And a good review in the Times besides.
Well, hello, Larry. I guess a lot of people are familiar with Larry's career and his work, so we'll just do a little catching up before we get to Volume 2 of The American People. I thought if we could start if you could tell us a little bit about what was going on in The American People Volume 1 and what it covered, and then we'll go into the rest of the conversation. So set us up for beginning to read Volume 2, which I think myself, I've read both of them, of course, as a biographer, but I think they can be read independently, and I always think if you're reading the second volume of something, you can always read the first volume as a prequel published later.
I don't remember the first volume.
Okay, well, I guess that means you'll have to find it out on your own.
It's interesting. The first volume ends in a very awkward place because I got sick. And so it ends in the McCarthy era when it should have gone a little further. So interesting. I'm reading Volume 2 again. Interesting.
Well, I mean, just to follow up on that point, I mean, one of the things that has been so interesting to me in researching your life and in talking to you about your work is what a relentless and restless rereader of your work you are, not so much after it's published, although you must do that too, as you're saying you're reading Volume 2, but the amount of self-editing that has gone into your work, the questions that you ask of yourself, I mean, pages and pages of notes that you write on each draft of Faggots, of The Normal Heart, and then the openness with which it seems you send manuscripts to other people for their comments. I mean, so that each of the books is a sort of collaboration, it seems, between your own rereadings and then what other people are saying. You're much more collaborative as a writer than I think sometimes people would take from your public persona. I mean, what is this about you that is so open to the criticism that goes along with the creative process? Well, I mean,
most writers keep rewriting and questioning things. I don't ask anybody's opinion, but I came late to being a writer, believe it or not. I was a late bloomer, and I didn't really write anything of any substance until 60 in London. And I didn't know how to write. And you learn somehow if you're lucky.
So did you want to write and just were afraid to write, or was it that you didn't have encouragement to write and, as you say, you didn't know how to write?
I think when everybody wants to write is always afraid in the beginning of actually sitting down and writing. And before you actually, you think you're going to do it, and you don't. I've had a lot of therapy, and that always helps. I couldn't think of not writing now. I just couldn't. But it took me a long time to get here.
And I think at a certain point, I mean, when you were writing screenplays, you worried, it seems, that you could only adapt other people's work. I mean, even if you could do it really well, like with Women in Love, you seem to have feared that you weren't able to write your own stuff, and that's, I guess, something that therapy helped you in the 70s to find that you really were able to do.
I discovered I didn't like writing screenplays. So that was a good lesson to learn.
Well, you had a fun experience with Lost Horizon. I mean, so I've been begged by my friends to ask you about Lost Horizon almost more than they want to hear about AIDS. I mean, I think they'd rather hear about Lost Horizon than Act Up. It might be a rarefied taste, but...
There's a nice, I think, funny section in Volume 2 about the making of Lost Horizon. A man called Russ Hunter, who was the queen to end all queens. And I didn't want to do it, but they kept offering me more and more money, and it was a nightmare.
There's a wonderful letter from Ross Hunter on one of your drafts. I guess you had inserted into Lost Horizon a kind of, not necessarily explicit, but a romantic scene that he said, this is a family picture. You know, we've done all these studies in places like Cincinnati, and they're dying to have a family musical. We can't have a scene like that in it. And I guess you took it out. I don't know, but it's the way a movie is made would seem to get your goat and make you very angry. It made me think, why were they hiring the person who had written the screenplay for Women in Love if they weren't willing to see a love scene on screen? Did you ever get an explanation of that?
Money. I was in L.A. With a friend of Women in Love, and I met Ross Hunter, and who was very impressed in Women in Love with the nude wrestling scene. And he couldn't believe that we got away with it. And I mean, this was a real queen. But he just, I would say, Ross, it's me, it's Larry. I'm gay, like you. Oh, yes, I forgot.
So this time in LA, though, frustrates you a great deal, and you want during this time to write a novel. I mean, which is what you come back to New York to do, which becomes Faggot. So I mean, can you talk a little bit about how you segued from I guess the lucrative work you had done with Lost Horizon to focusing on your novel and settling in this beautiful apartment that you still have, that has been the place where you've done all your writing, and where also GMHC was founded, et cetera. So just get us to 1975 to 1978 when you begin the novel, and then how it gets published.
Well, Ross almost gave me a nervous breakdown, and I was having fits in Los Angeles, just walking around, just to keep myself occupied. And I called my shrink in New York, and he said, "You should write a book about what it's like to be gay in New York." And it was a very good idea. I didn't know very much about what the gay life was like at that particular time, whatever it was, 70-something. The gay world was very I don't know, complicated.
Well, it's simplified a lot since then.
And I just, I did everything. I mean, Gay Synagogue, Fire Island, the Bears, all the things. I had not been exposed to any of that. And it really was a research project. And I enjoyed writing it. I had a good time. I thought it was funny. It didn't, it offended a lot of people.
And did that surprise you? I mean,
I gotta tell you, I've offended so many people over the years that it doesn't. Faggots started out as it was about, I was desperately in love with a man called David Webster.
and he's still called David Webster.
Whom I'm married to now. But it was a long time coming, and it was very dramatic somehow. But that's where faggots originally came from. You did it to me.
Well, and the main character of that book is Fred Lemish, who the reason we're talking about this is he's also a major character in The American People, Volume 2, The Brutality of Fact. And so if you could say a little bit about how much of Fred is autobiographical. It's interesting to me that in Volume 2 in particular, there are some people that you refer to by their real name, and then there are other people who you refer to by funny and often fanciful pseudonyms. So talk about how much of what is in Fred is really you, and then how you made the decision to name names or not name names.
I was walking down on a very fancy street, East 60s or something. Flemish Laundry was delivering. And I said, "Oh, Lemish, Fred Lemish." That's where your name came from.
And so you've been happy enough with that over the course of all of these pages.
I'm stuck with it. I think if I were choosing names anew, I probably would have gotten something a little more something or other.
But he in this volume tracks very much what happens to you. I mean, that he writes a book. First of all, talk about the years at Yale that have led to all of this. I mean, that is a major part. I should have set it up chronologically of the beginning of the book is your time. I mean, you say it begins in the McCarthy period, but what is so wonderful about the fact that it ended, if it did end somewhat abruptly in Volume 1, is that it begins with the real beginning of your adult life in going to Yale. So historically, it may be an awkward break, but personally, it's quite the right start for an autobiographical novel about your times and your alter ego.
I tend to call them as I see them. And a lot of it, I don't make up a lot of stuff. Some I do, some I don't. I started out, believe it or not, by wanting to be a comedy writer. And I never got anywhere with it. There's a play I wrote called Just So You Know, about Nancy and Ronnie Reagan, which I thought was hysterically funny. And Frank Rich was supposed to review it and didn't. And Mel Gossow hated it, so we didn't last very long. I'm still hoping somebody will do it. Whatever.
So you get from Yale to London. You live in London for a decade, then you come back to the United States. We've talked about your writing faggots. I mean, you've mentioned the Reagans. The Reagans are characters in Volume 2, quite central characters, but they're people you don't call by their names. They're the Roysters here. Rooster. Oh, see, well, thank you. You should do the audiobook, please. So it's funnier that they're roosters. I mean, I missed a whole level of comedy in the 800 pages of the book.
No, well, Volume 2 really lays into Nancy big time. She was a tough cookie, and she was known among a certain circle, and she liked giving blowjobs, and she was famous for it. And
you can read more about it in Volume 2. I want to become a little serious, even though you are a comedy writer, because one of the things that is so interesting and fateful and horrific about what so much happens in Volume 2 and has happened in our history is the unfortunate, horrific coincidence of the fact that Reagan is elected president in 1980, obviously is inaugurated in January of 1981, and then what becomes the AIDS crisis begins to be known in the spring of 1981. And so the intersection of this changing idea of what government can do, should do, will do, and the sudden great need of gay people and others who obviously are affected by AIDS, all people, for the very kind of government programs and services that the New Deal at least promised. And so the end of that era and the disappointment, the shock almost that you in the novel and in history seem to feel that to come up against that new reality at the very moment when gay people need government to find that, in the title of this book, we are not part of the American people. So can you say something about this? What happens in 1981 that changes you as well as all of American history, but LGBT history in particular that we're speaking about?
I grew up in Washington, so I'm familiar with government and what it should do and what it doesn't do. So there's a lot about that in the book. And it's also a very mean city. And a lot of people doing really dreadful things. So I got into all that. How much of it is real, how much of it isn't? I think everything I write is real.
Well, but what you say, I mean, about them, I mean, I think this is very important. I mean, about the Reagan administration. Then they figure out what their political philosophy for the, quote, good of the American people will be. It must be different from whatever any other opponent's political philosophy of what is good for the American people is said to be, and of course isn't, so they can criticize the hell out of it. And then they get the American people to elect their new president. That's all there is to it. That's how it's done, as old as America itself. And I'm just curious if you could say more about how shocking, not so much the idea of the government not coming to rescue, but it seemed that the 80s were not going to be welcoming to gay people as part of the American Union. I mean, and that seems to come as a bodily shock to you that energizes you as you then, in the summer of 1981, try to gain attention for what will become AIDS. I mean, what then is only known as gay cancer. I mean, you, in your letters, I mean, even though you do it publicly in the Native, I mean, it's in your letters, too, that you're really trying to figure out what gay cancer will mean and what can be done, even when it seems it's only a very limited question.
Well, it's still a question that troubles me a great deal. My life changed in 1981 with the first announcement. And AIDS entered my life, and it's still there. It's still a plague. It's still awful. It's not in any way satisfactorily being attended to. It's killed an awful lot of us, and still is. I'm actually writing yet another play about just that. Where are we? Where have we gotten with all of this? I think that the gay world is very disappointing in how it's lived its life these past years. I personally feel a great failure that for however we think still is so awful. People come and say thank you, thank you, thank you, because of the organizations that I helped to start, but I'm disappointed in us as a people. I don't think we are as I don't even know what word to use, but we're terrible activists. We're terrible joiners. We're terrible in politics. We have no leaders. All the things that you need to keep a population healthy, we're bad at. And because I love gay people so much and love being gay so much, I find this very sad to have to deal with. Still.
I mean, one of the interesting things, I mean, you're saying this, and when you spoke at the queer march and the rally in Central Park, I mean, you talked about the duty of opposition in that speech. And one of the things that is a theme in both volumes of The American People, and certainly in Volume 2, but is what you feel is a lack of true organization in the sense of the latent, the potential political power that gay people have if they were to be better organized. And I was very intrigued to find that in the 70s, before you wrote Faggots, I mean, which I just want to quote in this context, I mean, the potential political power that Larry is talking about, the first line of Faggots, which is hilarious on one level and yet speaks to this issue totally, is there are 2,556,596 faggots in the New York City area. And I read that opening line as a sheer, if slightly exaggerated, statement of numbers, because the idea of numbers to you has always been so important, and what we can do with our numbers. I was, Larry saved everything, and I mean everything in his apartment, I guess. David must be glad it's finally most of it at Yale. But it's been breathtaking. On the one hand, I know that Larry bought an electric pencil sharpener in 1974, an important chapter in the book. But more important is that you did a lot of your correspondence, professional correspondence. I mean, Larry was a freelance writer in the 70s, so I think it was necessary to do it on carbon because he needed to know what he didn't have a secretary, et cetera. But in 1975, you wrote a letter to Nora Ephron. It was in December of 1975. I mean, Nora Ephron, who coincidentally years later would have a cold and bow out of speaking at the center, and so you had the meeting where you proposed really what became ACT UP. But you wrote this letter, and I just want to read a little bit about it from it. Obviously, it didn't happen, but we have the letter he wrote. She was a contributing editor to Esquire at the time. I'd like to write a monthly column for Esquire on what I see happening in the gay world. Nobody's writing about us with any coherence or distinction. Too much is happening that's not being reported at all. Changes are occurring almost faster than they can be absorbed. Attitudes soften, harden, metamorphose from day to day. This state seems to coincide with what is a gay population explosion. For whatever reason, we are now eminently visible and becoming more so. Do you know how we're organized, our hierarchy, groups, attitudes, divisions? Do you know how many activities are available to us, how much purchasing power we have, or how much political power we potentially have? And so that was you in 1975. So I read Faggots in a completely different way, thinking of what you were doing by invoking that number and by showing what you call the faggot world. And so it seems to me there's a political urgency or a political through line in your thinking, even in your fiction, and then it's certainly true in the normal heart, from 1975 to what you were saying in Central Park 6 months ago, that the potential organizational power of gay people is much greater than we know.
Than we ever use. We're simply not organized. We are not fighting for our lives. It's the one question that has haunted me from the beginning of AIDS. When we had activists out there, how few of us there were, and how few people were willing to go out there and fight for their own lives. And it's still the same. It's just as bad. We're not fighting. We're just not. And AIDS is worse than ever. It just is. And I can't see anybody speaking for us as the spokesperson with any, I don't know, must be a Jewish word for it, that you want to follow. I mean, we don't have a Bella, we don't have a Gloria, we don't have a lot of people speaking for us. The organizations we have are few and far between. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking.
So you don't look at the rise of a figure like Pete Buttigieg as representative of a political power for LGBT people per se. I mean that he's a spokesperson for a political movement, but it's not our political movement.
We'll see.
And so, do you see the success of gay marriage, at least for now in the courts? I mean, as you see these as separate advancements, from what you're talking about in terms of the organizational power.
Well, they're different things. Gay marriage is wonderful, isn't it?
There are a lot of husbands in the first row.
I'm a fighter, and I don't feel that I'm surrounded by fighters. And it's so awful what's happening now. And I read so much stuff on Facebook, how we gotta go out there and protest and protest and protest. And we're not doing it. We're not. Jane Fonda is someone. It's just, I don't see us. I don't feel us. New York is not, anywhere else. New York is something special, perhaps. But I don't see our power. And we are a very worthwhile group of people. And it hurts. So,
well, one of the things that you talk about in the book, I mean, there's a lot about the group is called Fuck You, Fed Up Queers Unite. I mean, instead of Act Up, and so there's a lot of. I mean, I don't usually hesitate in saying that word, but somehow here in this building, is it consumes your life, I mean, and many other people's lives, and you give them voice. I mean, one of the things that's so interesting about this book is the structure. I mean, the number of voices that are in it. The dramatic scenes, monologues. You give voice to a lot of the people who were in Act Up, and their characters in this book. But what it seems that you're saying is that yes, that Act Up had a lot of great impact, but its impact was not related to the number of people who it mobilized, across the country. Even though many people were mobilized to become involved in Act Up chapters.
Not nearly enough, and I never could understand how every gay man was not fighting for his life. We had maybe, when Act Up really got going, we maybe had 30 or 40 chapters around the country, maybe representing, I don't know, 10,000 people all told. That's not a lot of people. When you're dying and everybody else is dying, why isn't everybody fighting there with you? And I still say the same thing. I don't see all of us fighting for our lives, for our people, for loving, because of your loving gay. Anyway.
Well, I mean, at the end, I mean, of the American people, I mean, you seem to have had some personal happiness. I mean, that we've discussed here. I mean, and that is part of the book, and yet partly because of the political situation that we're facing as a country. I mean, it does not seem particularly welcoming to some of the ideas that you're talking about, and you address that at the end of the book. I mean, we have come so far from 1981, and yet to seem by the end of the book to have ended with an election that brings a great deal of the same horrors. I mean, if not literally with the AIDS crisis, with a changed political situation, and that obviously doesn't make you very happy looking at what the American people have done and chosen as their definition of what the American people is.
What's your question?
Well, I guess, I mean, tell us how you think about that in the novel. I mean, you certainly address it. So the distinction between having come so far and having come no distance at all, it seems, that you finally are trying to make sense of that.
That's well put, Bill.
Well, thank you. Okay. But one thing I want to end with this before we go to questions with I mean, not that there's too much cause for optimism necessarily, but you write in the book that 1981, I mean, when July 3rd, 1981, which of course is the date that the New York Times article appears, about 41 cases of rare cancer. And there had been news in the gay press. Larry Mass had written about this before, but that obviously is a different benchmark when it appears even in a back page of the New York Times. So you write that you could no longer be a zombie. I mean, or Fred could no longer be a zombie, and it awakened you. And so that's 1981, and it moves you to the activism that we've discussed. And 2 years later, you're writing The Normal Heart. And I found this great remark, and this is what I want. I wonder if you still feel this way, because it's a certain kind of optimism that you seemed to have in 1983, even though it was a very bleak period in gay history and the history of the AIDS crisis, and even in your own life, having left GMHC. Whether you feel any of this potential optimism, you were writing. I mean, as I say, because Larry saved everything. I've seen his notes on the
Who said I was that optimistic?
Well, no, I'm wondering if you're optimistic. I'm not saying you are. I find this wonderful bit of optimism even in the bleakness, and I'm going to read to you what you said in 1983. You're revising the first draft of Normal Heart, and you write, "The point of AIDS and the play is that we must put aside forever all the paranoia about what caused us to be gay, what we are, what our parents did or didn't do to us, because no one will ever know, at least for a long while, and we must refuse to allow ourselves to be categorized by anyone, parents or shrinks, as anything less than whole and strong and healthy. And if it takes a woeful illness to give us this strength, to bring us together into love and harmony and visibility, then let us see the one and only good thing in this epidemic and cherish it as we cherish the memory of our dead brothers who have died to teach us this lesson, that we must love each other singly, not in promiscuous profusion and confusion. And with this support, this love of two men for each other, we can build communities and force progress on our behalf and be recognized as the responsible men we in fact and indeed, albeit currently hidden, are."
Well, writing about it and seeing it are two different things. ACT UP destroyed itself. People aren't aware of that. It's self-destructed. It's probably one of the finest examples of a successful grassroots organization ever. And they managed to destroy themselves. And that broke my heart. It broke my heart when Yale refused to teach gay history. My brother gave them $1 million to do it. And they didn't do it. It's never ending what we have to fight. And we should I love being gay. And that motivates a whole lot of this. I think we're wonderful people. And I wish everyone else acted the same way. So.
Well, I think as we go to questions, we can thank you for making gay history and making history and having written history. That's why we're here. The volumes of The American People and everything else you've written have given us a history. Thank you. So there are microphones going around, and we'll take questions. If the lights can come up, because I can't really see people's hands. Oh, there. You in the second row with your hand up.
I think I can speak loudly.
Okay. Okay.
Can everybody hear me?
No, I mean, the microphone is right there. I mean, so.
I think that anger, as a black woman, for those in the back, I'm a black woman. I think that anger relies in part on being separate and apart and vocalizing your separateness. I think that American culture, I'm in my 70s now, and the life that I've lived has told me that American culture and survival in America relies on assimilation. Don't you think in part that your despair at the gay movement and its I'm not going to say failure, because as far as I'm concerned, working with young people, it hasn't failed at all. But its lack of continuing largeness and just power is in part because of this fight in America for people to just assimilate, get married, buy a house, love in that kind of stereotypical way. The question is, do you think assimilation is in part why you're in despair?
That's too grand. I think anger is a very, very healthy emotion. That didn't answer your question.
Yeah, you kind of did.
And we should all be angry. And I don't see us being angry.
Hello, Larry. You wanted to see anger.
But not from the audience.
There are a lot of us in this room have devoted ourselves to activism, and I know you think we failed, and I know you think you failed, but if they were remaking A Wonderful Life, and they showed you you had never existed, what do you think would be different? If you had never existed,
if you
never
like
saw
George
It's a Wonderful
Bailey,
Life,
were able to see what the world would have been like had you never existed, well, I don't know, would we all be living in Pottersville? I mean, I suppose we may be, but can you, I think Andy is asking the question, if you have failed, what would success have looked like? I've changed your question.
what you did, what would be different?
I guess, what would the world be like if you had never been born?
I mean, I think that's a stupid question. We're very lucky to have you and you and Anna in your program, and fighting for all the things that I'm saying. I don't see many gay programs around the country. I don't see many people doing what you do. I don't see people fighting. That's what I see.
Are there further questions in the back? Oh, I see some hands there in the second to last row.
You know, one thing we don't
the Hallmark Channel, when they had the incident related to having two women trying to kiss in the ad, and the feedback to make that change, which took a couple hours, don't you see that as something that is positive and therefore showing the activism that's out there?
I guess, I mean, do you follow that where Hallmark pulled the ads that showed two women kissing?
And we made a to-do about it, quite right. But, you know, you're talking peanuts here. I'm talking about millions of people dying. I spent a lot of time just trying to decide in the book how much I wanted to get into dealing with the fact that it's our sex lives that give us AIDS. And no one sort of is willing to give up the dancing and the mine shaft and that kind of thing. Anyway,
In the yellow.
Hi. You've talked a lot about yourself as a writer, as an activist writer, and I just have a question for you as an artistic writer. And I was wondering if there are certain gay writers that you think we aren't paying enough attention to, and who are the gay writers that maybe inspire you today that you think we should look at?
I don't see much great writing out there among gays. Number one, gays are terrible customers for books. Any publishing
Not tonight.
Any publisher will tell you that. We're not big book buyers. And I don't think we're necessarily especially good writers in an important way, you know. I don't have to read books about guys doing that in the meat rack, and those are the ones that somehow get published. That's not necessarily good writing. Are you asking me, are there gay writers that I respect? Not so many, no.
Can you name some of your friends at least? I think we have time for one more question. Is there? Oh, here.
Jim.
First of all, Larry, it's Jim Farrat. Thank you so much for what you've done. Even when we disagreed, here we are, two old men, still alive, still caring about our children and our grandchildren, all those gay and lesbian kids who are being now hidden. I wanted to ask you, I haven't heard the word gay used so much as I have in this room tonight in the last couple of years. And I just wondered why it is so important to you that you use the word gay and not use the new closet word, which is called queer.
I've just take the word queer, and I remember being called a queer when I was a kid, and it hurt. It's like calling yourself an insult, I think. But anyway, it's not that important. Gay history is not being taught in the schools. Queer studies, gender studies is being taught in the school. And I think those are full of shit. And gay history is Abraham Lincoln being gay, George Washington being in love with Alexander Hamilton, Abraham Lincoln. That's history. Because I believe they're true. But try and teach it in a school without it being full of sort of gobbledygook.
I just want to ask before we do the book signing. Then, I mean, in terms of the use of the word queer, or the feeling that you have about it from its use in your life, what was important to you or wonderful to you about using the word faggots as a title for a book? Because I just love saying it, and you can't say it otherwise for the most part. So, but no, I mean, so it's such a great title. And what was important to you about using that as a title for the book?
Actually, I didn't choose it. Bob Gottlieb, who was head of Knopf then, I think, said that's what you should call it, faggots. So that's how it got to be called faggots.
Well, thank you, Bob Gottlieb, and thank you, Larry Kramer.